Hello and welcome to season 2 of Interjections. We're starting the new season positive, happy, and ready to go. I'm your host, Andrew. I've got Jay, Miko, and Sterling with me. Jay, how's your positive outlook for season 2 looking?
About as positive as Italy's footballing future.
Whatever. Hi, Miko.
Hi. Good to be back. Little break, but yeah, let's go.
Sterling, always appreciate you joining us. Big 4th of July plans coming up here this week.
Yeah, I had a party last night. My country club puts together like a big Fourth of July celebration every year, so we did that last night, and then I think I'm gonna be heading up to Jacksonville, Florida, where my in-laws are for the actual Fourth of July holiday. But yeah, it should be a pretty good time, and now we get to talk about all the fun stuff like Italy and Lautaro Martinez, and how obviously it's been him who's been carrying these Italians the entire time.
Country club? Like tea and crumpets, sir.
Yeah, I thought
Yeah,
Irfan was our only country club member on this podcast.
no, I am a country club member as well. Mine's not the tea and crumpets one though. That one's a little further south than mine, and that one costs like $30,000, and you had to wait 10 years to get in. Mine is like $5,000, and they'll let you in today. So it's a little different.
All right, so let the record show we have 2 country club members on this podcast.
That's right.
All right. Well, they're making me talk about the Italian national team, so here we go. Let's talk about it. A disgraceful exit yesterday against Switzerland. Easily one of the worst Italian performances in a major competition of my lifetime. Yesterday's performance for me was worse than losing to Slovakia in 2010, tying New Zealand, losing to, or whatever it was, to Costa Rica. It was one of the all-time worst Italian performances. And even looking bigger picture, this tournament's performance was one of the worst ever by an Italian national team. They scored essentially 2 goals that mattered against Albania in 10 minutes and proceeded to stop playing football for the rest of the tournaments, minus getting very fortunate with some added time against Croatia at the end of the game. The entire system was disjointed. Spalletti did a great job becoming the second worst manager post World Cup victory in 2006. It was Ventura-esque. There is nothing I can do to explain Spalletti's actions during this competition. We're an inter-focused podcast. I'm going to spin this in an inter way. We're the most dominant club in this country. It's not even close. We showed that this past season. And throughout this team, there are 4 or 5 impact players who are all inter players. So you have Inzaghi, who has set up this. It's a Ferrari of a system, this refined 3-5-2. The players know what they're supposed to do. We have some of the best players in, if not the league, the world in the squad. And Spalletti's solution to this is not to build around it, but to destroy it. He played DeMarco as a conventional left wing back. DeMarco never plays for more than 60, 70 minutes a match. First 2 matches, he plays DeMarco 82 minutes against Albania, 90 minutes against Spain. He picks up an injury. He's out for the knockout matches. He wants to use Calafiori and Bastoni together in a pair, so I have to watch these 2 awkward left-footed center backs. You swing Bastoni in the middle where he's not nearly as effective. Irfan has talked on this podcast a million times about how Bastoni and DeMarco together on the left-hand side is a cheat code. It's one of the best combinations in the world. We immediately break that up. We can't take any advantage of it. Barella is the only player he played in position of the Inter players. You have Darmian being used as a conventional left back for some reason. Fratesi's, who could barely crack the starting 11 here, is now your starter for the first 2 games, plays horribly, directly leads to 2 goals for the opposition. So Spalletti ignores every foundation Inzaghi has laid for this squad, butchering the team. You can't go back and forth between a 4-3-3, a 3-5-2, every game, depending on how you're feeling. He comes out against Spain and he's like, we're this alpha football nation. We need to impose our style of play. We're important. And he gets trounced in possession. He responds by, against Croatia of all teams, rolling out this 3-5-2 that had no interest in playing football. There was like 0.2 X goals in the first half of that match because we had no intention of actually scoring. We did nothing for 45 minutes. And then when Croatia took the lead, he had to abandon ship on the 3-5-2 and just throw all sorts of players on. And then it all culminates yesterday to me when he decides to start El Shaarawy at left wing, the same El Shaarawy who was missing from the national team for 3 years. And when you have to listen to Spalletti explain, he started El Shaarawy because of his tactical discipline, because he tracks back. Because that's what you need. You need El Shaarawy and Darmian together on the left wing. I can keep going. I don't know why Brian Cristante is in the national team. He is the same thing as Gallardini. They are the same player. No first touch, no prowess. And then to play him as a box-to-box midfielder yesterday in a 4-3-3, it's just embarrassing. Spalletti had absolutely no idea what he was doing and over his head. And I don't want to hear it about there's not enough talent in this national team, because this is what I have to keep hearing from people. It's, there's no talent, there are no players. They're talking about the 06 team with, Del Piero and Totti and Inzaghi. And it's like, of course that team's worse. But that's not the point, because if you look around national teams, we talked on this podcast, the German national team, this is a down cycle in terms of players. Who on the Spanish side scares you on an individual basis? The answer for me is nobody, except for apparently Di Lorenzo is afraid of Williams, since Williams said he could see the fear in Di Lorenzo's eyes. Aside from France, there is no national team who scares me right now. That's a state of football thing. That's the way players are brought up these days. They're all robots. It's all this very mechanical, high-pressing stuff. There is absolutely enough talent in this national team to be better than this. The performance yesterday was embarrassing. I don't have any questions for you guys to add. Talk about what you want.
I'm going to say the biggest disappointment was, as you pinpointed, Spalletti himself, as poor as the players were. It was disappointing because I had kind of led myself to believe that Spalletti had kind of overcome some of his insecurities. Spalletti had long been seen as this kind of, bit of a kind of maybe like a higher grade Ranieri in a way. A nice guy who is good at the press conferences, has some really lovely things to say, and just some really kind of memorable quotes here and there, but ultimately is a bit of a loser. Bit of a also ran. And when he won the Scudetto with Napoli, I was legitimately happy for him as just it's just one of these long-time Serie personalities who's been there, been around the block, come close a few times, always seems to get the short end of the stick. And then he finally, got his ultimate reward of winning the Scudetto, not just winning, but dominating the league with Napoli. And so I felt this was a step, a step in the right direction is an understatement. I thought this was him finally exercising his demons and realizing his destiny to an extent. And for him to kind of do what he did during his stint his ongoing stint as the national team manager, culminating, of course, in this Euro humiliation, it was deeply disappointing because it just gave me it made me feel like he hadn't learned anything at all. It made me feel like this was just the worst of the worst 2016, 2017 type Spalletti, where, we're battling to qualify for fourth place Champions League on the last match day of the season, barely scraping by, team looking like clowns, bailed out by some Handanovic miracles, and the team just looking disjointed, mentally fragile, the coach himself making horrendous self-sabotaging tactical decisions, confused selection choices, and just looking generally inept and woefully afraid and showing a lot of cowardice. And that's what this Euro just brought me back to, that Spalletti. And that was, I guess a little bit upsetting in a way. Like I said, I wanted to believe he had grown, but in reality, he had not. And so, it's always disappointing when you're let down by, maybe it was wrong for me to place that expectation or that kind of greater belief in him. But regardless, I was disappointed. Speaking of the players themselves, I think the only Italy players that can kind of come out of the tournament with their heads held high are Donnarumma, Calafiori, and Bastoni, and maybe like a tiny bit Chiesa, but the rest of them, man, that was just all round weak. I expected more from Barella, from DiMarco, and sure they were not utilized particularly well, and yes, they were not helped by the coach's selection, team selection, nor the coach's tactical decisions. But regardless, you still want to see a bit more fire, a bit more drive, and the teams just looked tired. The players looked bereft of motivation, bereft of this kind of self belief, and a huge part of that is down to the coach. But at the same time, you want some more pride, you want some more kind of individual drive that's that occurs on like a kind of individual level, not reliant on the motivation of the coach. So all around, what a disappointing show from Italy. It was the definition of going out with a whimper. I will say that Juventus look like they've got a fantastic prospect on their hands with Calafiori. And the one positive from an Inter perspective, in my opinion, is that we got, it's not even hugely relevant to us because we don't play in a back four, but, I had long been kind of concerned that Bastoni was a bit defensively fragile to play in a back four, in a conventional four-man backline. I thought playing as the left centre-back of a three-man backline really kind of hit a lot of his weaknesses, but he performed quite well in a two centre-back pairing. And so, getting a glimpse of his quality in that role was reassuring as well. Last thing I'll say is some of these guys just absolute bums, man. Mancini, trash. Cristante, trash. El Shaarawy, washed. It's incredible to me that the likes of Chiesa in this current, and this is not the Chiesa 4 years ago, this is post ACL Chiesa, who's notably lost a step, who's been frustrated by a couple of years of playing under Allegri's horrendous football, and just a bit of a chaotic period for Juve, who haven't won the league in a couple of years, and yet even that kind of compromised, diminished version of Chiesa is still by a significant margin Italy's best attacking player. That is just a disgrace to me. I'll pass it on to Sterling.
Yeah, and I think that when I look at the Italian national team, the only thing I can really throw at the players is the lack of fight. I thought that they downed tools very quickly. I think that the match against Spain in particular, they were really not the same after that. I think they didn't expect to get battered the way that they did, and it was demoralizing.
Zero
Um,
shots on goal.
Zero shots on goal, but I mean, just the look of the game overall, the constant embarrassment of Di Lorenzo. I mean, he got his pants pulled down at least 5 or 6 times during that game, but just utter domination from Spain. I think that kind of broke the team mentally a little bit. But outside of that, I think everything else has to fall at the feet of Spalletti. I mean, he came into this tournament talking about how he's so happy that he has the Inter block and he's going to rely on these players and he's going to build on that. And it's so important that these guys play together at the club level. He also brought players to play a back three, and he brought wing backs, and he didn't bring a right winger because he was going to play a 3-5-2 variant. And then as soon as the tournament starts, it's gone. He immediately goes to this back four weird hybrid formation where, I mean, Calafiori and Bastoni looked fine in it, but the rest of the team looked lost. These guys didn't really have relationships on the pitch. They didn't know where to pass without thinking about it and taking an extra touch. There was no combination play, and it didn't help our already weak forward line create any chances. So I think it just put the entire team in disarray. And then on top of that, when you use three different formations essentially in 4 games, and then you change personnel. I mean, he made 6 changes before a knockout game, bringing guys who really had no business being on the Italian national team into the team and playing them as starters. I mean, with all due respect, I think we've already talked about Cristante and those guys who are Mancini, who definitely shouldn't be in the team. But even giving the keys to Fagioli, a guy who's been out for the entire season due to a betting scandal, then you immediately bring him into the national team, and then you start him in a regista position in a knockout game. That makes no sense whatsoever. And I don't want to harp on Fagioli. I don't think he was the biggest problem yesterday, and I think he is a decent talent. I don't think he's a world beater or anything like that, but I think he could potentially be a rotational type of player for the Italian national team. He needs more experience, and he needs to actually play club football, which he was not able to do this season. But to bring him in and play him as the regista over Jorginho yesterday, I think it just really showed that he lost the plot entirely, and the players showed that as well. Yesterday they had zero confidence. I think that the players aren't stupid. They know what their best potential formation is. They know the best way that they can potentially play and show the best version of themselves. And when you have Darmian starting at left back and you have El Shawari brought into the team, it's not going to give anybody any confidence. And it's obvious that team had never played together as well because they didn't know how to play together. And so it was just a overall embarrassment for Italy, and again, a lot of it just falls at the feet of Spalletti because I think he actually had a much easier job than he ended up making it. All he had to do was really play a back three and play to the strengths of most of the players on the team, not just the inter players, but most of the players on this team played a back three at some time during this season for their club side, and he could have just leaned on that, and he refused to do it. And I really just don't understand why he decided to go that route. I don't know if it was because I think he fell in love with Calafiori, and I think he wanted to find a way to shoehorn him into the 11. But he also wanted to play Bastoni, and maybe he thought the back four was the only way to do that. I really don't know, but either way, it just didn't work. But the bigger issue for Italy moving forward is, as a whole, there is a talent gap issue. Now, don't get me wrong. Was there enough talent for Italy to beat Switzerland yesterday? Yes. Was there enough talent for them to go deeper in this tournament? Yeah, I do believe so. I mean, a lot of these guys, at least the Inter players have played at a very high level, even in the Champions League, within the last year or two, and they've been fine. Um, but I do think that there is still a talent issue for Italy in terms of the depth and especially the attacking talent that they can bring to the table. And when you look at Italy's youth teams, they're actually performing extremely well. The U17 Euros, they're the champions. U19 Euros, they're the champions. U20 World Cup, they went to the final. There's talent in Italy right now in the youth levels, but the issue is these kids, they're 17, 18 years old, and they get put on the bench of a Serie B team, or they get sent to Serie C, or then maybe they make it to a Serie A team, but they just never play. There's a real issue with Italian coaches not wanting to play kids between the ages of 17 and 22. They just essentially don't think that they exist. They don't think that they can trust them. They refuse to play them. And maybe it's the culture of how quickly they sack coaches in Italy. I'm not sure. It is a high pressure environment, but all these other European nations have found a way to play youth talent and develop youth talents, and actually they're seeing the benefits of it. I mean, if you look at the Spain team that dominated us, you have Pedri, who's a very young player still, has been getting minutes for a very long time at high level. Obviously, you have a 16-year-old, and Yamin Lamal, who is looking like he's going to be the next sensation, and then you have Nico Williams, who's 21, who also has been, I think he's almost at 100 La Liga appearances as a 21-year-old. I mean, when you take young players and you actually put them in an environment to grow at the absolute highest level, not all of them are going to work out, but some of them are. And the ones that work out, they can potentially become truly special for you. But if you took Lamine Yamal and you put him on the bench of a Serie B team for 2 years, you're going to stunt his development. He's not going to be the player that he is today. And so I think that that's where Italy needs to look long term. Now is the moment for them because they have the talent. It is there, but they need to find a way to actually play and develop these players because I think in the long run, it will be better for not just the national team, but also for the Italian clubs as well.
I'm gonna quickly comment on Spalletti, although you all three said basically how it is, and I agree with you that Spalletti made everyone look so bad. I feel like let's talk about Parella. He looked much better 3 years ago with Mancini, and 3 years ago he was 3 years younger, 3 years less experienced, and now he looked like shadow of himself. Like Barella with Inzaghi, he looks like a world class player, and here he was barely visible. Okay, there was one connection with Barella. It was with Jorginho, which I think worked pretty okay for Italy. And then Spalletti, of course, he had to break that up for the knockout match for some reason. But the big picture is that Spalletti simply made everyone look worse than what they really are, and I can't understand how is it possible. Okay, there was only 10 months to do the job, but that's still not excuse for this kind of a performance. Nagelsmann had less than that with Germany, and look how Germany's doing. Yeah, they have a better players there, but they have a clear structure in their game, and the players know what they're supposed to do. Instead Italy, they have no idea what to do, and like you guys mentioned, Spalletti like kept shuffling the lineup and the formation all the time, and it was just a total disaster indeed. One thing came to my mind was that maybe the injury of Azzurri played some part in this, because he would have been like a veteran presence in the defensive line. Okay, Bastoni did the job fairly well, but I don't think he's yet this kind of a leader of the back line, especially in a system which he hasn't been like used before too much, or mostly at the national team in some random matches. But that was one idea, that maybe Spalletti had the idea of using Acerbi there, maybe Bastoni, I don't know, maybe three-man defense, so that Bastoni would have been in his best position, so there would have been the connection between Bastoni and Di Marco, like was mentioned earlier. But yeah, maybe that was one unfortunate thing for Spalletti, but of course not an excuse to have this kind of a disaster outcome we saw, especially yesterday. Yeah. One thing about the talent thing, it was a good point from Sterling, that the talent is it is there. Maybe the top talent in the national team, it's not up to the par with the best ones at the moment in Europe and the world. But of course, Italy should beat Switzerland. Like that's not even a question. And when it comes to the younger players, I feel like in Italy there is indeed the problem of like over relying on the experience and the veterans. And I think that the issue is so deeply rooted in the fact that there's always has to be the result, and that's the first thing which will be looked and it starts from the coaches, and the coaches will have the pressure to get the result, and that's why they will rely on like their trusted players, which are usually the more experienced ones, and the younger guys won't get the chance. And I think it's not too easy to fix, because it's like it goes all the way to the coaches, to the leagues, to the association level, like how, and the media and the fans, like what is the expectation. And I feel like the game is so tactical in Italy that the coaches that's why the coaches rely on their experienced guys, and the game is a bit different compared to, for example, like in Spain, where the I think the talent level is different there. Uh, yeah, uh, but yeah, it's not. I think it's not easy to fix. But let's see how they're gonna go from here. It was not too positive from this morning when the association the big guy Gravina had the press conf, and he said there that absolutely Spalletti won't be sacked or anything like that. So I don't know. I don't know what's their plan to continue with Spalletti and like everything go as normal. And yeah, I don't know.
There's still time for a big money wealth fund to come and take him away, like they took Mancini away from us. So maybe that's the plan. I guess two things. One is, even when you look at the squad construction, it's clear to me that there was absolutely no plan from Spalletti. If you just think about this at a very basic level, I think Sterling hit the nail on the head. Spalletti fell in love with Calafiori, which is fine. He's a very good player, but he's not a strong defensive player. You have 3, 4, if you want to count Acerbi, really talented left-footed center backs: Bastoni, Buongiorno, Calafiori, Acerbi. And you can use 2 of them at a time in a back 3, but you're playing, if you go with Buongiorno, Bastoni, that's their normal positions. If you go with Buongiorno, Calafiori, that's their natural positions. But when you play Calafiori and Bastoni together, you are playing inherently someone out of position. But Spalletti fell in love with Calafiori, wanted to play him, knew Bastoni's too good to bench, had to accommodate things. But my point here isn't to get, that's a pretty meaningless decision in the grand scheme of things. My point is that DeMarco was the only proper left back that he brought to this Euros. And when you look at that screams to me that the initial plan was to use a back 3, and then he changed his mind, because Darmian has some experience as a left wing back, but Darmian hasn't played as a conventional left back since his United days. So why isn't Baraghi here? Why isn't, I don't know if Udagi, what's the guy, Udagi, whatever it is, from Spurs, I don't know why he's not here. But anyway, it's clear to me there was not a plan to switch between this 4-3-3, 3-5-2. I don't know when he made this decision. The other thing we need to talk about is the attack. Obviously, if you go to a competition and receive 0 goals from a striker, it needs to be a conversation point. Retegui, Scamacca, 0 combined goals. They didn't even come close to contributing to a goal, to be quite honest. And the problem is there are no other options. And you all know how I feel about Scamacca and Retegui as players. Love one, hate the other. They were both poor this tournament. I'm sympathetic towards both, though, because they were left on islands. Yesterday against Switzerland, the game plan was hit long balls to Scamacca. He's surrounded by 3 Swiss defenders, and you need him to head it down to someone. It's just not going to work. Retegui, who is a talentless hack, had one job against Croatia and was to run around like a chicken with his head cut off for 45 to 60 minutes to try and tire out Croatia before we conceded and he had to come off. There's nobody else, though. I mean, Moise Kean, who apparently is about to transfer to Fiorentina, is horrible. He doesn't have any talents. Mobile, we're not rehashing that argument. He's, 34 going on 35. Where are the young strikers? I don't want to hear a single utterance of Pinamonti, who is a Serie B level striker, as he is now aptly in the league. There's just no alternatives. You need to make it work with Scamacca and Retegui. And I don't know if the solution is to get better play out of your wingers by not starting El Shaarawy or calling up someone like Politano. I don't know. But maybe Berardi post Achilles, even though that tends to be a devastating injury for people. I don't know what the solution is, but you're stuck with these two strikers. These are your only two realistic options unless you do something really weird like all Spain and go with a false nine. So you're going to have to make this work, and I have to keep listening to these broadcasts complain about Scamacca having one goal for the national team. Retegui has 2 goals against the Swiss cheese opposition when Mancini first called him up. There are reasons for concern with the strikers, but I have a hard time singling either of them out this tournament when the teams around them were so horrible. And it's not like they were missing chance after chance. They were just not involved in the game. Are they responsible for not being involved in the game? Sure. But once again, this isn't like Arnautovic against Atletico where it's miss after miss after miss. These guys had 2 looks at goal the entire tournament, and that ultimately falls on Spalletti for me.
Yeah, agreed. Just to touch on that talent issue really briefly, I think it's quite a significant concern here. I mean, there are just no... I mean, you look around anywhere, and I think we're all kind of influenced by the nostalgia of when we were growing up, and I guess like the kind of romance years or the formative years for us as football fans. You know, for some, that's like 2004, 5, 6, 2010. For Miko, it's like the 1970s. No, I'm kidding. But, you know, it seems like, to use the 2006 World Cup as an example, you have players who, when all is said and done, are going to be remembered as Italy legends, who from this squad has even the slightest potential to be seen in 10 years as a comparable player to Totti, to Del Piero, to Pirlo, to Cannavaro, to Buffon, Donnarumma, perhaps, maybe Barella, if he continues to play at a high level, but he hasn't played at a World Cup. You know what I mean? He's 27 years old and he's not played at a World Cup. That's obviously not his fault, but just he's been deprived of the opportunity to ever show that he can, you know, play at this like Italy 2006 kind of level, you know, and therefore it's only kind of natural to assume that he will not really go down in history as one of, you know, these kind of great Italian players, again, like the Tottis, like even the Zambrottas of the world, you know. And I think that's a huge problem. I mean, like I said, it does kind of apply to a lot of different teams as well. Like even Spain right now, this is not the same Spain with Xavi, Iniesta, Casillas, Puyol, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? David Villa, whatever. You look at this Spain, and you're like, you know, am I supposed to be like terrified of Kubarsi, who's still, you know, going to high school and taking his bloody, you know, math tests and stuff like this, or like you said, Nico Williams, or I don't even like. I literally have trouble naming the Spain squad. You know, this in itself just goes to show, at least to myself individually, the kind of drop off in that legendary quality. There were times where I could name you every single player in the England, Spain, Germany, Italy, France, Netherlands national teams, but this generation is a lot harder. And obviously, like I said, that's to do with the passage of time and legacy and all these kinds of things. But it still feels like other teams have players who have that potential to replicate that legacy of legendary players, whereas Italy does not. The last time Italy produced a great number 9, is it Luca Toni? Could it actually be fucking Mario Balotelli? You know what I mean?
It's Balotelli.
I'm not even considering Immobile because as good as he's been in Serie A for so long, he's always been a flop on the international stage. So, yeah, it might actually be Balotelli, which is a terrifying thought. It's hard to get into this discussion without opening up a whole can of worms and a whole bigger discussion about the footballing system and youth structures and all this kind of stuff. But it is extremely problematic, and I think, like I said, Italy kind of suffers from it more than other teams. Like Bellingham could be easily a Scholes level player in terms of quality and impact and legacy. By the time he's the same age, he may overtake Scholes based on his current trajectory. You've got players like just to go with the England example, you've got players like Foden, even Declan Rice, Trent Alexander-Arnold. These guys all have the potential to be as good as or better than some of these legendary English players from the 2004 to 2010 kind of era. Your Rooneys, your Beckhams, your Gerrards, and what have you. Italy, though, again, there's no player who can come close to touching the quality of the likes of the Cannavaros and the Buffons and the and the players who won the 2006 World Cup, the Pirlos, etc. And that's a huge concern. And I think that lack of international pedigree is, it's so hard to kind of just reverse that rot, but unless it's arrested soon, if it even is possible to arrest it, I think it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. You've got young players, as you guys mentioned, Bellingham, Pedri, Gavi, whoever, Yassine Lamal, these guys all ready to take that step up if they haven't already. And in Italy, you've got you're playing with like Cristante. You brought in Darmian to play as a left back. You've got players like Zaccagni as like your best player off the bench. It's really quite bleak. Right? I really think the future of Italian football as a national team is a bit bleak. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if Italy does not qualify for the next World Cup. I know there's a bit of time between now and then, but right now, if you ask me to bet on it, I would say Italy is not making the next World Cup. They just don't have the mentality. They don't have that international caliber of player.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. Well, I don't want to continue with Spalletti. I've seen enough. I'm not kidding. I would sack him and take Pioli. I would take Allegri. I'm willing to take anything else because the complete lack of plan I saw these past 2 weeks was horrifying to me.
Yeah, I don't know how you continue with Spalletti. I just don't get that decision from the FIGC because, I mean, when you have the performance that you saw against Switzerland and the lack of confidence, I mean, he's lost the team. It's obvious that he lost the team and lost the dressing room. I don't know how you get all those guys back on side now, even if you roll out the perfect, Inzaghiism 3-5-2. I just feel like it's too late. Yeah, and I mean, even Allegri is out there, and I mean, I can tell you one thing: he's going to get you qualified for the World Cup. There's no doubt about that. You might not like the way that it looks, but I think that there's zero doubt that he probably get Italy into the tournament. And he actually is decent in those one-off knockout stage type of games. So I mean, he could be a potential choice, but it sounds like they're going to stick with Spalletti, and I don't think that's necessarily the right decision, but it's a decision that they've made. So it will be interesting, and I don't disagree with Jay. I would not be surprised if Italy is not in the United States in 2 years for that tournament. And just so you know, Udogi is hurt, and that's the reason why he wasn't called up. I think Spalletti was going to bring him, but no
What did you
excuse to not
guys
bring another left wing back.
What did you guys think of his comments? Kind of like, which seemed to, I don't know, kind of suggest that the Inter players that were, I don't know, like the foundation of the squad, which they weren't really, but he pointed out, or he claimed that Inter players were not like mentally there or something because they'd won the Scudetto too early or something like that.
It's
Yeah,
a
I saw
joke.
that. That's bullshit.
It's a joke. He used every Inter player out of position, out of shape. I can't with Spalletti right now. Every post game press conference was just him up there rambling like a lunatic, insisting he was right. And he didn't make a right decision in all tournaments. At the end of the day, yes, we won the league going away. But you know what that means? It means the other teams in the league also weren't fighting for anything. What was Napoli fighting for late in the season that had Di Lorenzo so checked out? What was Roma fighting for? A spot in the Europa League, the Europa League semifinal? Like, it's ridiculous to call out the Intercore when, frankly, Barella and Bastoni were two of the only players who showed up this tournament. I will conclude with this. The reason I care about this so much, and this one hurts, is because of the lack of World Cups that Jay pointed out. I just want to say, like, they haven't gotten out of a World Cup group since 2006. They've failed to qualify for the past 2 World Cups. And when you talk about players who could have been legends, like, I think Verratti is one who could have been a legend if he had, multiple World Cup appearances. I'm probably not willing to go there with Jorginho, but Jorginho was an influential guy who won a Euro. What if he had a great World Cup under his belt? Like, there was a path forward for these guys to make legacies, and to have an entire generation of Italian players miss out on World Cup football is something we've never seen before. So that's why losing these Euro competitions has me so upset, because I don't know when the next time we're going to get to see this country in a World Cup is. It might not be anytime soon. So these European competitions just matter more. So to go out without a fight, that's why I'm so upset.
In classic J fashion, I'm going to rub salt in the wound by saying now nothing stands in England's way, and football is coming home.
Okay. That's a good point to segue off.
I will get my prediction right again, because I picked England.
All right, so this is all Miko's fault. Glad we can blame Miko. So let's get into the Inter news of the week, which is the signing of Martinez, the keeper from Genoa, Spanish national. So everyone, including this podcast, was reading the news reports, which was that Bento was our top choice. And then depending on who you get your news from, there's kind of diverging stories. One is that Bento is too expensive. There were lots of English teams knocking for him. It just wasn't realistic. But then there's these other reports coming from Sky Sports that this is a tactical choice by Inzaghi, and Inzaghi could have had either player, and he prefers Martinez, which I think is interesting. So the total fee for this is going to be 13 million plus 2 bonuses. There were talks of using a counterpart, and that's why we all thought, okay, maybe Martinez is the alternative, because we're going to use some counterparts to get some capital gains, help lower the price. But instead we go all cash, and ends up being a kind of an expensive transfer. So this is interesting for a few reasons. I like using the site FB Reference. It's just basically stats for footballers. And they have a player comparison tool. And I find it really interesting. So they always list the 10 players a player is most comparable to based on stats and all that. And one of the 3 most similar players for Martinez is actually Onana. And when you think about, they have similar pedigrees, right? They both came up through Spanish academies. The stereotype is they're good playing with their feet. They're apt passers and distributors. And when you look at Martinez's stats, so his expected goals allowed is a bit lower than his actual goals allowed, which basically means he conceded a few more goals than the advanced metrics would have thought he would. And maybe that speaks to that you're sacrificing something in terms of shot stopping ability for his distribution skills. And as I say that, in my mind, that sounds a lot like Onana. So very similar profiles, and maybe that's the magic we're trying to recreate here. I've seen a lot of fans online complain about this transfer. They're not convinced by him. They think we're paying for mediocrity. So Miko, what do you think? Do you give Morata the A+ thumbs up for this?
Well, honestly, I don't know a lot about these goalkeepers. I watched some Genoa games, and yeah, he looked decent. I think he was pretty aggressive. Like I remember from him that he was pretty aggressive when he came out from the goal, and he was good with the feet and so on. didn't see any howlers from him, apart from, of course, they do this uh, uh, in the social media, these kind of videos where he supposedly concede some easier goals, but apart from that, I haven't seen him doing any bad stuff too much. As for Bento, uh, well, haven't seen him play ever, so I honestly can't comment on him. But of course, he need he is talented and has potential because he's in Brazil national team and they have like good goalkeepers there. But as for the rumor which was saying that it was Inzaghi's choice that he rather wants Martinez and not Bento, personally, I don't buy that at all. Uh, I think that it's more about the price than anything else. I read that we offered 50 million for Bento, and it was not not enough, and we decided, okay, that's it. We go for the other guy. I don't know what's the real price. They say it's 20 million. I think it might be even more with the agent fees included, like there usually are with the bigger transfers from South America. So uh, I feel this is purely a price decision. We go for the cheaper guy, and I'm not too disappointed. Maybe I would have rather wanted Bento, but I understand. I don't want us to spend like 20 million or more to a goalkeeper, which is not like a certain starter for us. Because as much as there is potential for Bento, he hasn't played in Europe at all. At least Martinez has experience in Serie A, so that's one plus for him. And of course the, like mentioned, the Spanish academy background, like for Onana. I think are they both from La Masia, the
Yes,
Barcelona
they both played
academy?
there.
Yeah, so no wonder they look similar in with these advanced stats or whatever you call them. But yeah, not too disappointed, but I can understand if there was like 1 year when we almost waited for Bento, since he was rumored to us since last summer. But yeah, it's fine to me, no big issue.
White Menyan. And what I mean by that is there's an impressive highlight reel of him conceding goals at his near post, just like, you know, Menyan was kind of loved by Milan fans, and he still is, I guess, but given their poor season last season and his numerous injuries, he gets injured a lot for a goalkeeper. And then a growing trend of him conceding fairly soft goals at his near post. I've started to notice some grumbling going on in the red and black fan base about Magnan and his tendency to concede at the near post. And like I said, there's a great compilation of Martinez getting scored on in his near post. So we have that to look forward to. All jokes aside, he's tall. He plays with a certain kind of solidity that I like. He looks like he has a lot of confidence. I do like that in a keeper. I'm The only other thing I'll say about him is that I'm really, really curious about what Bento will go for because, and this is actually more about Bento than it is about Martinez, because if the price ends up being comparable, and as Andrew said, we ended up paying 15 million in cash anyway, despite all this, like, Martinez will be able to, Martinez is a more viable option because we can write off, 4, 5, 6, 7 million by sending a youngster to Genoa. We didn't, we ended up just paying cash anyway. So if we are going to pay 15 million in cash, like I said, I'm really curious to see what that selling price for Bento will eventually be, because if it's close, then that's kind of annoying. I mean, if let's just say hypothetically it's 20 to 25 million, I just don't like this idea of you scout a guy for a year, maybe even longer. You seem fairly convinced by him, and then because you can't afford him, you go and buy, your second choice for like potentially 75% of the price, it just doesn't sit well with me. Like, you know what I mean? I would always go for the approach of, look, you can shave some money off elsewhere, you can save in other areas, you can make money in other areas, but if you've really spent the time scouting a certain player and you believe in that player for your project, then just spend that a little bit extra and get him. Like I said, that'll be irrelevant if he ends up going for like 35 million to like Man United or something. But you know, if Bento ends up being sold for like 20 million, then that would annoy me a bit. But having said that, you know, I mentioned, you know, even early into last year that I was quite impressed by what I'd seen from Martinez. So I do like the player, but yeah, like I said, I would have liked us to see a bit more daring with our approach to signing him, because you know we've had some good luck in that our second choices have often kind of paid off better than the first choices. The prime example being Lukaku. Lukaku not signing for us despite our best efforts, and then you know the backup player Thuram ended up being much better. You know, so we've had some luck in this regard. You know, we didn't get Bremer, and we ended up getting Acerbi, and Acerbi ended up being pretty good for the most part. So we've had that luck, but you know me, I don't like riding on that luck. I'd rather we just went with conviction and spend the money where we deemed fit. You know, we put our money where our mouth is and just go for it. But anyway,
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Jay. I think that Morata is just very pragmatic, and I think that he went into this season along with Auxilio saying we have X amount for a goalkeeper, and it's a position that we want to fill. We want somebody who's on the younger side, is going to come in, be okay with sitting behind Sommer for a year or doing some type of a split with Sommer, where maybe they just play some Copa matches or maybe the odd Champions League group stage match or something along those lines for this year, and then potentially could be the starter moving forward. And if that price is 15 million that we have to spend, well, you know, we're going to negotiate for Bento and see if we can get him at 15 million. And if not, then we're just going to move on to the next target. That's kind of the way that Morata's always operated. You know, as you mentioned previously, some of our secondary choices that we've bought that actually have turned out really well for us. It just seems that that's kind of his MO. You know, he has the budget and he understands the financial controls and restraints of our club, and then he tries to do the best to work within that. And so, yeah, he's not going to stretch the extra 5 million, even if it means getting a player that was first choice, even if it means a slightly potentially more talented player. And you know, I can't really sit here and pretend like I know who is the truly better goalkeeper between Bento and Martinez. I don't watch enough of the Brazilian league to honestly give you a recommendation on Bento as a player. I've watched his highlights. He certainly seems to have an extremely high ceiling. Obviously, he's in the Brazilian national team. Brazil has a great reputation for producing fantastic goalkeepers. So, you know, you look at him and you think, oh, maybe he's the next Allison. But outside of that, I mean, have any of us really been watching Atletico Paranaense matches? I doubt it. So we don't really know his true ceiling and potential. But obviously, we've seen Martinez a couple of times here in Genoa, and honestly, he wasn't a player that really stood out to me either. And yes, you have seen some of those near post goals that he's let in, but I do think that we view him as a another Onana potentially, where it's, hey, you know, this guy maybe isn't the absolute top tier shot stopper, but he can make up for that with some very good distribution, which is not really Sommer's strong point. Sommer is decent at it, but he never looks extremely comfortable with the ball at his feet, with the way that Onana did, for example, and a way I would expect Martinez will look more comfortable with the ball at his feet. And I think that Martinez is also a better sweeper keeper. So if we are eventually going to move away from, you know, an Acerbi, and start playing a slightly higher line, having a sweeper keeper back there could potentially make a lot of sense for us. And obviously, you know, again, it worked pretty well when we had Onana back there. So I think that I agree. I don't think that it was necessarily Inzaghi who said, "Hey, I don't want Bento." I think by all accounts, Inzaghi seems to be a guy who goes with the flow for the most part. If management tells him that they want a player and they're going to sign a player, he seems to be pretty open to trying to find a way to make it work. And I don't think that he would have had any issues with Bento, but I also don't think he's going to have any issues with Martinez. And I think that he likes a goalkeeper that is good with the ball at his feet. And, to be quite frank, the way that we play and set up defensively, we can kind of get away with having a guy who maybe is average or slightly above average as a shot stopper back there and still probably not concede a ton of goals. Defensively, this team last year was very solid. We didn't have much of an issue back there. And, Sommer, I think, is a very good goalkeeper, but I wouldn't necessarily put him as an elite shot stopper, at least not at this part in his career. And obviously, he almost broke the clean sheet record last year. So, I think a lot of that has to do with our system. So if we feel like, we don't want to overextend ourselves on the goalkeeper position, I I can get on board with that. I think Andrew's mentioned before, it's hard to want to spend money on that position when you already have somebody who is very, very good. It's not a position where really we needed to spend a lot of money to improve it this year. They obviously felt like they wanted to bring in a true potential long-term number one, which I'm fine with, but there's other positions in this team where I would much rather spend money. And hopefully that means that we have some budget left for those other positions. And I know it's probably going to take some sales still to fill those roles, but at least the majority of that sale money hopefully can be reinvested into those positions where it actually is potentially a weakness for the team long term.
So I don't know. I'm glad we got this done early, is probably my main takeaway. The trending under Murata in several years has been that we don't go to preseason camp with these types of transfers done. So I'm glad we got it done early. July 1st is just around the corner. Zielinski and Taremi should be announced soon. So we should be looking at a situation where most of the squad is settled in by this point. There's been a few rumors of outgoing transfers, but it's just nice that we're in a good spot. But Jay, you were complaining offline about like us not upgrading the Scudetto winning side at all. We're pretty much running it back with the same group. I would just like you to elaborate on that. And do you think we're setting ourselves up for disappointments by basically running it back? Or I don't know, like there's a reason for us to be optimistic, right? Like Napoli kind of deconstructed their Scudetto winning side a little bit. We're taking the same core and just cleaning up the edges. So if you compare and contrast those two scenarios, which I think are comparable, like how do you feel about our approach to this mercato?
0 out of 10. No, I'm kidding. It's a really difficult question to answer because I think there's a lot of intangible factors that go into it. One of them is the squad's motivation. Can you keep the same core or maybe even the same 11 that won the Scudetto last year and expect them to just play as if this was last season? I'm just inclined to say no. I think, and that's just history teaches us the answer is no. I think the most successful legacies or dynasties of like, even if it's not a dynasty, even like 2-3 years, you see teams refresh and rebuild upon and build over what they've already built. And I don't want this example to be taken out of context and out of proportion, but one of the best examples was Juve winning the league and then going and buying the best striker in the league from their rivals Napoli, when they bought Higuain for 90 million. And then when they dominated the league with Higuain, what do? They go and end up buying Cristiano Ronaldo, of all fucking players, for another 90 million. This is a kind of endless pursuit of ever increasingly diminishing gains that you kind of need to strive for, even if it's not as extreme as that. Where does Juve go from like Ronaldo and Higuain? What are they going to do? Get Messi next? You know what I mean? It's kind of like I said, a point of diminishing returns. But I think we're quite a bit away from that point. And yet I don't think our approach is close enough to that either. And at the same time, I don't think our players have that kind of ruthless Bayern Munich or Conte, Allegri, Juve the 2010s, Juve kind of mentality to just grind away championship after championship after championship, that serial winner mentality, and not get, and not get bored of just dominating the league. Ironically, I think the fans might even get bored of it before the players do. But you know what I'm saying? I do think it requires a bit of that kind of drive, and I don't think our market behavior really reflects that. I mean, maybe Zielinski will end up replacing Mkhitaryan, but Zielinski was pretty trash at the Euros, and he hasn't really. He's been a bench player for, or he spent a lot of time on the bench this last season due to his contract issues and disagreements with ADL and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying he's finished, obviously, but we're not buying the Zielinski that won Napoli the Scudetto, even though it was only 2 years ago. He spent a year looking like a shell of himself, and so there's going to be a bit of a recovery project that goes on there. Thankfully, he's still only 30, so he can recover, hopefully, but to not upgrade on any of the pieces, I think is, or any of the other pieces, I think is a really significant issue. Sommer looks like he'll probably continue starting. Having said that, he's been letting in some pretty soft goals. I think he let in 1 or 2 soft goals in the Euros, and one was disallowed. And towards the end of last season, some of his goalkeeping was a little bit suspect, and he's hitting 36 or something. So maybe the decline is on. Maybe I'm just overreacting. Who knows? But yeah, you've got a goalkeeper who's hitting that kind of the really last 2 years of his career kind of age. Acerbi obviously is already quite old and just had to miss the Euros because of an injury. Then you've got, I feel like our left and right side of defense is pretty set with Pavard and Bisek and Bastoni and Augusto, but I don't know. I just feel like, for example, Dimarco. I definitely want Dimarco as a starter next season, but we've said this many times. He's not like the most ruthless professional. He's got that kind of typical Italian mentality where he really enjoys his football, which is good. But maybe this is a harsh thing to say, but I feel like if there were players in our squad that you might see complacency creep in, I do feel like Dimarco is probably going to be a prime suspect for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just something about him. You know what I mean? He's just too kind of jovial in some ways. Maybe even Barella. Maybe. Hopefully, I'm not being too. Hopefully, I'm not targeting the Italians too much. But I think you guys know why I say.
You sound like Spalletti right now. These Inter Scudetto winners are complacent.
Yeah, exactly. They've slacked off. They've lost their cutting edge. But I think you guys know why I point at like Dimarco, for example, as like a potential guy who might need a bit of straightening. Otherwise he might kind of become a bit complacent. Like I said, Barella could be there. I don't think we'll have that issue with Lautaro too much. His issue is just his inconsistency, regardless, and that's not like I've never thought that's a matter of complacency. It's just I don't know, like a quality or mentality issue. Thuram I could kind of see as well. I don't know why, but I can kind of see it. But yeah, just overall, I think the biggest thing is, like I said, history teaches us that the successful dynasties always improve. And it's like, as I say, it's hard to improve upon a winning formula, but they do. That's what every team that's had like a kind of cycle of winning has always done,
The only thing I would say is that we do have Morata at the helm, right? Who obviously was at the helm when Juve went on that run and seemed like they were going to win every Serie A title for the rest of history. And he found ways to make little tweaks over time to that team and keep it competitive. I think that we are underrating a little bit some of the moves that we've made because they were made so early and because they were free. I think that Taremi is going to be a pretty big boost to our forward line. I don't think that he's necessarily a world beater, but I think he's better than what we had last year. And I think that he will put more pressure on Thuram to perform because I agree with what you're saying, Jay. When I look at, in particular, Thuram and DeMarco, they're two that worry me in terms of maybe having a complacent year.
Yeah, they're just very
And
unserious
again,
in some ways. You know what I mean? They joke around a lot.
yeah, yeah, and you can just see it, and especially in DeMarco, I was kind of unimpressed by some of his performances towards the end of the year when the league was wrapped up. Let's be honest, but It seemed like he kind of just went off the boil and just seemed disinterested. It kind of carried into the Italy performances. If you watched him in the friendlies leading up to the Euros, he seemed completely checked out, was making weird back passes directly to players, putting them under a ton of pressure. And then, you practice how you play. The very first throw in of the tournament, he throws it to an Albanian inside of the box and it turns into a goal. That to me is just lack of mental sharpness. And I do think he had maybe some physical issues that were going on as well, but just looked a shell of the player that he looked under Inzaghi. So, hopefully this has actually been a humbling experience for a couple of these guys, and maybe they'll come back in with a renewed hunger to kind of prove that the Italy thing in the Euros performance was more of a blip than who they actually are as players. But no, I do agree that there is potential for some complacency in the team, but that's going to have to be up to Inzaghi to straighten that out. We do have a really good left wing back option in Carlos Augusto. I don't think that he's as technically talented as DeMarco. I don't think his ceiling's as high, especially from a forward or going forward perspective. But defensively, I think he actually is stronger. And he's going to be fully rested because he's not playing with Brazil at all this summer. So, what I would like to see from Inzaghi this season is maybe some more willingness to rotate and maybe some more willingness to play a hot hand or at least strike some fear into the guys who are in the starting 11 and have comfortably been in the starting 11 for the last 2 years to know that there is actually potential that they could be replaced in that best starting 11 going into a big match, and that he's not just going to rely on his old guards as he has, the last couple of years, and rightfully so. I mean, let's be honest, we've won a lot of big games. Those guys have performed for him, and I'm not saying that he should drop anybody for one bad performance, but I would like to see that he is a little bit more willing to, let form dictate who is going to actually be in the starting 11 moving forward. But one thing I will disagree with you on, Jay, is that I think Zelensky is going to be a pretty decent piece for us. I think he's going to, if Inzaghi lets him be the starter over Mkhitaryan, I think that he could certainly surprise us. I don't think that his Euros was really that poor. I think Poland's Euros were really poor. But I think that he had some really bright spots throughout the Euros, and I think that yeah, he looked a little off the boil last year at Napoli, but I think that that team looked off the boil. Obviously, they went from finishing in first place by a wide margin to not really competing for Champions League at all. So I think that that's certainly not a Zelensky problem, right? That's a Napoli as a whole problem. And you look at the guys like even Kvaratskhelia and how they performed last season in comparison to the prior year, and we just saw with Italy what a coaching change and lack of direction can do to a set of players, and that's what I saw last year with Napoli. And whenever you have to chop and change coaches multiple times in a season, obviously you've got real problems. So I don't think that that's an indictment on him as a player. I think that he can still come into Inter and really be a good move. And I think that we've silently, replaced a couple of pieces that underperformed for us last season. Now there are still some that need to be replaced. I still honestly would like to see the sale of Dumfries, and if Dan Ndoye is that player, they could potentially come into that role. I'd be extremely excited based on what I've seen from him, especially in the Euros. He's been electric, and I think there's still that center back role that needs to be addressed long term. Not that Acerbi's
Yes.
not a great player. I think that he's been a, a real surprise. I don't think any of us thought that he was going to come in and have the performances that he ended up having for Inter, but he's like 37 now. That's a huge, huge risk to go through a long club season. And this club season, by the way, is going to be longer than ever, with the Club World Cup potentially being in the midst of it as well. We're talking about like, and the new format of the Champions League. I think we're going to add like 8 games, like eight or eight, nine, maybe 10 games or something like that to the schedule, which is insane. So, if you're talking about relying on a 37-year-old a Cherby who now is having injury issues, and you're talking about DeVry who isn't old, but also isn't young, and also I don't think is absolutely top quality. Anytime that he gets the pressure gets ratcheted up, and we have to rely on him, he folds. We've seen that in some big matches over the years. So don't want to necessarily rely on him for long stretches of the season either. So that position is one where I think that we probably should be looking to strengthen and make a move there. Need to be probably a little bit more ruthless and get one of those guys out, get somebody younger in who could potentially be a starter. But one thing I will say, one of the only silver linings I'll take away from this whole Euros performance and the Inter players is that Bastoni has shown that he could potentially play in that role, I think, long term. If you wanted to bring in somebody who could be a left center back and move Bastoni to the central center back role, I still don't think that now is the time for that. I think that Bastoni's still probably best on the left side while he's still young and has the legs to get up and down and support the attack. But I think that when he gets into his later 20s or early 30s, I could see him potentially switching into that role, and it looks like he would be fine and probably be a comfortable switch into that role long term. So something to keep an eye on there as we look for a long term replacement to those two guys there. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I don't know if I completely agree with Sterling with your characterization of De Vrij. I understand why you believe that, because we all remember a few games he looked awful against Giroud, but I do think he's been reliable more often than not the past couple of years. He's kind of rediscovered his form. I don't know if when we extended his contract a couple seasons back, that instilled his confidence again. But I don't have many moments from this past season or the past 2 seasons where I have square blame to put on De Vrij, and I'd feel comfortable with us moving forward with him as the starting center back. I completely agree, though, we have a depth problem, especially with Acerbi's old age. Maybe Miko can let us know if he thinks a 37-year-old could play 40 games in a league.
Well,
But
real quickly, I'll just say Depay, the Depay goal
Uh,
with Atletico. I mainly put that on De Vrij as well for not being tight enough to Depay in that situation. Now, obviously, it's not just on him, but it was very reminiscent of the same goal that Giroud scored on him a couple years previous. I don't
yeah.
think De Vrij is a bad player. I think De Vrij is good for like 95% of the time and 95% of the matches. And it's just that at the highest level, when the pressure really gets ratcheted up, he has a mistake in him, and he is a potential weak point. And I think that he's shown that on multiple occasions. That's my only issue with DeVry.
if okay, I see where you're going with this, and I want to frame it this way. I think De Vrij is good enough to win a league. We could, assuming everyone stays fit, I think we could win another Scudetto with De Vrij as our starting center back. But if you think about what parts of the squad do we need to upgrade to go further in the Champions League, which is always a crapshoot. Don't get me wrong, but what refining does it need to improve in that regard? I'd say that the three positions are central center back, right wing back, and then reserve striker, which we've talked about, I think, all those positions a good amount on this podcast. So I agree with you. There's probably a level above De Vrij that if we had, I don't know if Buongiorno's the answer, but if we had that next level center back, we'd be better prepared for a Champions League challenge. But I think we can get there if we use Acerbi in the big games, use De Vrij against the weaker competition. The problem is just fitness, right? Can these guys stay healthy over all these extra fixtures, which you were just talking about us adding on? And maybe we're not giving Bisek enough credit here. Maybe him playing more as a central center back is going to solve a lot of our problems.
He's not ready. That's my opinion on Bisek. I think he's probably best still in the right center back position. He still makes me nervous, even there, because he doesn't deal with aerial balls. He just does the thing that actually Bastoni did against Croatia, where it seems like it's not that he actually ducks like Bastoni ducked, but it just seems like he sometimes just gets lost in the box, loses his man, loses the flight of the ball, a chance gets created. I think that he has potential, certainly from a physical standpoint, and technically he's excellent, especially for his size, but positionally and aerially, he still makes me extremely nervous.
No, I don't disagree. And if we had a $30 million budget from Oak Tree, I would definitely prioritize center back over everything else, even right wing back, I think, because we can probably survive with Dumfries. But At the end of the day, we just don't know what the transfer budget is. I'm curious to see how this shakes out. If I don't know, there's been talks about clubs coming to negotiate for Correa or Naltovic. If we can squeeze 2, 4, 5 million somewhere, maybe that opens up another transfer.
Yeah, I think the latest is that we try to dump them, or at least one of them, so we can get Gudmundsson from Genoa with a Fratesi-like deal, so that we don't have to actually spend anything this summer. But yeah, let's see what happens. It seems that the rumors are so strong that Gudmundsson is like heavily linked to Inter, that he's gonna wait us and whatever. And
Did you know that guy's 27 years old?
Heavily linked to prison.
yeah,
He is heavily
Yeah.
linked.
Prison FC.
But seriously, I thought this guy was like a 24-year-old. There was some growth there. You're buying a maxed out player if you buy a 27-year-old.
but I think
Yeah.
he looked pretty
Yeah.
good last season. If we're honest, he scored like
good enough for a
50 goals.
27-year-old at 25 million. It's nothing in today's market, but as you know, in the Inter market, that's huge.
Yeah,
Well, if he goes
it's a
to
big
prison
money.
for
Yeah.
2 years, he'll be 29, though. I'm just kidding.
Which is prime age for Inzaghi, actually.
Can
He'd be just right.
Can we make sure it's an Italian prison at least? So he's got, in league prison experience.
You don't want to be a UK prison, or maybe you do. I don't know if you guys have seen that video floating around Twitter or not, but anyways, that's that's digressing.
I just imagine an Icelandic prison is like somewhere in a mountain. The cells are made out of ice.
No, I'm thinking like one of these super nice kind of like, no walls, no fences. People can come and go as they please. Like these,
spas there everywhere.
yeah, exactly. Libraries where they're all like learning, reading and learning how to cook and stuff.
But yeah,
One of
maybe
these
we put
Scandinavian prisons.
Yeah, that's a Finnish prison, right?
Yeah.
maybe we put a prison clause in the deal if he ends up prison, so the deal is off. Or
Yeah.
something
But in
like
all
that.
seriousness, I don't really see it with Gudmundsson. I don't think he would necessarily be a bad player here or anything like that. And I think he does have some talent. Obviously, he wouldn't be scoring the goals that he scored because his stats are solid for Serie A, especially for playing for Genoa. But he just doesn't really pass the eye test to me.
Could he be the new Thiago Motta / Diego Milito, the kind of unfancied, slightly older profile from Genoa, and then suddenly explodes? All right, I'll stop talking shit. But I actually like what I've seen from him. He looks technical.
Yeah, I like
I
it
see.
too.
I see the purpose in what he tries to do, even like in the fairly straightforward things, like when he makes a forward pass, when he takes a shot, you can see that there's always an intention behind it. He's always trying to, like, I don't know, he doesn't just lose his head and just smash the ball without composure. He tries to like shape his body and curve it around the keeper and put it at the far post or whatever it might be, or dink a ball over the top of the defense. But again, just given his age and given the price tag, I wonder if, although the signs there are good, although the ingredients look pretty good, are they good enough to really take us forward that much?
I think they are, because we are talking about he would be like a bench player for us, or like a competition for Thuram.
He reminds me of Barak at Verona, and then Barak kind of flopped at Fiorentina. I remember looking at Barak and just thinking, hey, this is a really neat player. And admittedly, he was doing it at a Verona level, kind of in the same way that Gudmundsson is doing it at a Genoa level. But Barak had this similar kind of, sleek technicality and finesse. And like I was kind of keeping an eye on him when he moved to Fiorentina. But yeah, like I said, I was surprised to see him not really make the cut. And so there's always that risk which exists. And the other question I had was, could he actually play in midfield as like the Mkhitaryan kind of role, or do you think that's not really his profile?
Yeah, I think that's been like mentioned, that he could be this kind of a multi-purpose player, so you can throw him in there as well. But I think he was in a very offensive role when he played like last season in Genoa, and to me he was there like the driving force in their offensive game, and that's what I like when you have this kind of guy who, a bit like Sule was for Frosinone. Like he was the guy who was driving the whole thing, and like okay, Retegi was there up front, but Gudmundsson was the one who like he was the guy you pass the ball and things start to happen because he can dribble with the ball and he can pass and shoot and he knows the movements, and I feel like he's a guy who would benefit playing uh, in a better team than Genoa. But of course, it's always it's always in a way that in some cases this kind of guy is better in a smaller team and not in a bigger team when he is not perhaps the driving force anymore. But somehow the Gudmundsson feels like a player who would be very good for Inter. But
Yeah, and
let's see.
when Jay mentioned earlier, and I know he was joking about Diego Milito and Thiago Motta being two older players that we signed from Genoa who weren't really heralded signings, but obviously turned out to be fantastic for us. But I actually think that when I look at Goodmanson, I think of another older person that we signed from Genoa who wasn't really a heralded signing, and that's Palacio. I think that he probably fits that mold more of like a kind of a second striker, high work rate, got an engine, and again, not necessarily heralded, but Palacio came into this club and I think surprised a lot of people. He was our best player for probably the span of about 2 years before he just got too old and lost a step. But maybe that's the type of player that Goodmanson could potentially be here for us. Another guy who, because I think Palacio also came in thinking that he probably wasn't necessarily going to be a starter full time, but obviously played his way into being a starter. But maybe they just view Goodmanson as a real true second striker type who does have a really good engine, will press, and will just make the right decisions in attack.
Okay. We should probably wrap up. We've been talking for a while. The only thing I wanted to hit on really quick before we wrap up is just talking about some players out on international duty. And just, we talked a lot about the guys at Euros. I've been watching a little bit of the Copa America. Lautaro has been on a roll from a goal scoring standpoint. He's scored in every match for Argentina. Buchanan started the first game for Canada, was horrible, was one of their first players subbed off, subsequently got benched, but he actually was one of Canada's better players last night coming in off the bench as a sub. Just a couple quick observations there. Sterling, I know you're a big Copa America guy, so anything you want to add in terms of Inter players on international duty?
Not really. I think that's you're right. Buchanan. So let's just talk about Buchanan. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about what his Inter future really looks like. He has been played as a left wing back almost exclusively by Inzaghi. I pray to God that's not where Inzaghi sees him long term. I mean, but even as a right winger, he kind of played as a right winger in a 4-4-2 for Canada in the first game. He just looked completely bereft of any confidence. He looked a bit lost out there, did not want to take on any players, just wanted to make the simple pass. Didn't really seem to want the ball. When he does get the ball in precarious situations, he looks like he's going to turn it over. He looks a little bit frail and weak, doesn't really win any physical duels. I'm concerned for what his long-term potential really is at this point. I think that if I were him, I would just tell him to come to preseason immediately. He hasn't played enough football in the last year to really need a true break. I would be there from day one of the preseason with the mixed squad of Primavera players and just trying to embed myself into the Inter team and that system as much as possible if I were him. Because otherwise, I see a very weird season for him where he probably again is getting garbage minutes of 10 to 15 minutes every other match in Serie A. And I don't see him really breaking into the team and playing real minutes that are going to change, his career. So I am a little bit concerned from what I'm seeing from him. Lautaro, no, great. I'm glad that he's starting to score again in an Argentina shirt because it's been a while, and I think that was part of his. I think he had a mental thing going on there with the with Argentina, where he was having a really tough time finding the back of the net. I think it seems like he's through that now. I'm not sure that he'll be the starter. I think that Scaloni will stick with Julian Alvarez because historically that's been who's won him World Cup, and he seems like he's happy to play him alongside Messi, and I think that probably will continue to be his starter for the remainder of the tournament. But Lautaro's making a shout for getting into that team, so I think at the very least he's going to probably start making that sub earlier and earlier if Julian keeps, excuse me, if Lautaro keeps scoring. Julian did score in this tournament as well. He had a nice little tap in, but I think it's 4 goals now for Lautaro, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe Julian has 1. So, if that kind of trajectory keeps going, maybe Lautaro will start a semifinal or something along those lines. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But I think overall, I'm just really happy to see he's scoring also at the international level now, and that's going to do a ton of good for his confidence when he puts back on the Inter shirt.
Jamie, I don't know if any of you have watched Copa America games and have anything to add.
Well, nothing to add for the Copa games, obviously. Haven't been watching those, but yeah, happy for Lautaro to getting all those goals. And as Sterling said, the confidence is key, so let's hope this will carry on. As for other Inter players in Euros, I wanna give a shout out to Çalhanoğlu and his great goal against, was it Czech Republic or Czech, or I don't remember which team was it, but it was this highlight reel shot in the far post, and that's been running around all over the place as a great pure touch to the ball. What about the others? Thuram, he's been okay-ish, but nothing fancy. France has had some problems.
France can't score goals.
Yeah, with their attacking as general. So I think there's some room for improvement for him as well. But I think he's been pretty dependable at least there, and he played like 90 minutes in the first match, and I don't remember how was it for the rest of the games.
I'm a bit surprised France has Pavard on the bench. I didn't realize he wasn't starting for them, but I don't think he's played yet this tournament, has he?
He hasn't played a single minute.
Yeah, I think they prefer, Deschamps prefer Kunde more than Pavard. I think they are pretty similar in a sense, that a bit right back-ish central defenders. So, and is it Kunde like a right back? They play with the 4-man defense, so I think that's the case. Yeah, but yeah, that's the short summary. I didn't even remember who the rest of the guys. Of course, almost forgot Aslani. I think he was pretty good actually.
Well, yeah, he was pretty good because he wasn't playing as a regista.
Well, maybe, but yeah, he got a good ratings, and he was good, and it's good for him to get this kind of experience at the this kind of international level, and playing well against top teams, or I don't know, top teams,
but seriously though, he was playing as a box-to-box midfielder, and he looked infinitely better than he has ever looked as a regista for us. It just makes you wonder, like, should we give this guy more license to roam forward?
Yeah, maybe that's the key for him to take a step forward. I don't know.
I mean, we've been asking for him to get some minutes in that Mkhitaryan role, I feel like, forever. And the thing about Inzaghi is that once he's pigeonholed you into one position, you're not playing any other position. So that's why I'm concerned that Buchanan will be a left wing back forever at Inter. But yeah, I think it's obvious that you're losing some of his skill set by playing him that deep in midfield. It's just not a natural fit for him. And honestly, physically, he's not a great fit for the regista role either. So I would love to see him get some minutes at left center mid, but obviously with the signing of Zielinski now, and you still have Mkhitaryan there, who Inzaghi absolutely loves. So it's probably not going to happen, but it is nice to see that it's something that we could potentially utilize. Because yeah, he actually impressed me a lot with his performances. Um, not just the fact that he was able to obviously get up and down from a box to box perspective, but also his passing I thought was fantastic in this tournament. And it was progressive passing as well, not just sideways and back, which I would love to see him utilize a bit more here at Inter. So, yeah, no, I was very impressed by Asllani.
I think just going around the rest of the team, Dumfries has played a bit for the Netherlands. The Netherlands has looked pretty poor. I think they ended up finishing third in their group. So not much to talk about there. And then who else? Jay already commented on Zielinski.
Well, De Vrij, he looked pretty decent, even though Netherlands haven't been great.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
were
you're
always
right.
like atrocious against Austria, but I think like a comparison in that match, De Vrij looked like decent compared to Van Dijk, who looked
Completely
like
agree.
a total catastrophe. So I think and in general that De Vrij has been able to take his spot in the starting 11 for Netherlands. That's like a good thing for him personally as well, because they have some good center backs there. De Ligt and who's the Spurs guy, Van de Ven or something like that. So they have players there, but he's been able to take that spot. So that's good for him.
All right, we should probably wrap this up. We've been going way too long. Do we have a Jay's hot betting tip for remainder of Euros?
England to win it. Yeah, football's coming home. There were only a handful of teams capable of beating England, and I don't think any of them are looking good. Italy's gone, Croatia's gone. You're pinning your hopes on Spain.
Switzerland.
Yes, Switzerland.
I don't know, man. Switzerland looked pretty elite yesterday.
They
actually looked good.
Largely enabled by how disgusting Italy were. I don't think England, as bad as England were, as bad as England have been, I don't think they'll let Switzerland play the way Italy did. All jokes aside, I don't actually know. The Euro is really, really up for, you've got one side of the bracket which is stacked, and then you got a whole bunch of fucking losers on the other side, losers like Italy and England. So I do fear that England does have quite an easy route to the final, and as a result, they'll probably, get there by just winning these dog shit games they have done in the group stages. And it's I guess good for a team to get to the final with minimal resistance. So rather than playing like several 120-minute games, you know what I mean. So I fear England has an easy path to the final, and that will play to their advantage. But I'm relying on one of the old tested teams like Germany, Spain, and France to kind of beat them. But yeah, I fear this time football is actually coming home.
So if Spain beats Georgia today, it will be a Spain-Germany quarterfinal. Quickly, who does everyone have in a Spain-Germany quarters?
I'm inclined to say Spain, but I hope Germany.
I got Germany. I think Spain is good, but I think that they have been overrated because Italy were absolutely garbage.
I have Spain in my bracket, but let's see. Also,
I'm actually thinking Germany as well for this one. I'm kind of with Sterling. I don't know if Spain would have scored against Italy if not for the own goal.
I'm thinking
I'm
Georgia.
worried about Spain's finishing.
Crava Messi, Cravadona.
Yeah, with Kvaratskhelia leading the line.
I'm enjoying him and De Laurentiis fighting in the media about his future. Anyway, conversation for another episode.
Quick shout out to Arnautovic. He's been good as well in this tournament and Austria.
No shout out to Arnautovic.
With the most sincerity possible, I say fuck off.
Edit out.
All right. We'll wrap up there. Nice potting with you guys as always. We'll be back next week with another episode.
We are back.
We're back, baby. Unlike Italy.
That's right. All right, see you guys.
Catch you later.